Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for those kind words. And let me say it would be cruel and unusual punishment for a senator to deliver a filibuster as you open this program. So I am simply going to say thank you for the chance to visit with so many entrepreneurs and give you a sense of where I think things are in this important policy debate. And as the new chair of the Senate Finance Committee and the former chair of the Senate Energy Committee, I thought it might make sense to start at the intersection of energy and federal tax policy here in our country. Now, it is no secret that the American tax code is a mess, a rotting carcass that seems to smell worse each year. It is not just ugly and complicated, it is unpredictable. Even if an investor is willing to dissect this mess to get to the part that affects him or her, it's hard to put money into an investment when there is so little certainty that the rules will stay the same from year to year. Now, a mess of this size is not made overnight. The mess has been built up over time, literally year after year. Practically every year, some powerful interest group says it's time to give special treatment to our particular industry or technology. And that treatment just gets added to the tax code alongside those that have come before. As the process has evolved, it has become easier to add new tax incentives to the code rather than to clean out what exists today. Sometimes investments go in the code just to fix or complicate one that's already there. And Congress just hasn't been real good at seeing the big picture or taking the long view. So first of all, I wanted to tell you it doesn't have to be this way. The Congress can pursue comprehensive reform, and one reason I'm convinced of that is because I have 9 years of sweat equity in this particular cause. With Senators Begich and Coates, as well as former Senator Judd Gregg, our bipartisan group has put together the first bipartisan federal income tax reform plan in the Senate in 30 years. And it really builds on the good work the Democrats and a group of Republicans did back in 1986. Now, I want to make it clear that I am not suggesting that nothing happens today on the ground. Certainly, energy investors are not exactly sitting around today just waiting for some grand congressional action. Even in the face of the convoluted tax environment, the reality is there have been some creative approaches in clean energy finance. I'm especially encouraged by the creation of so-called yield company deals that bundle clean energy projects, sometimes with fossil energy projects, to create a product that ordinary investors can buy like traditional stocks and bonds. And they're showing, in many instances, a consistent return on investment. In addition, other clean energy projects have been able to take advantage of the REIT structure, the Real Estate Investment Trust, which has been so successful in building out commercial real estate. A third area has been public and private partnerships and bonding. I've seen the power of these partnerships as the author of the Build America Bonds program. And one of the reasons I wanted to come today was to look with all of you for fresh ideas and approaches to tap them for investment in clean energy. Doing so would create another win-win by matching the public need for greater amounts of clean energy with private dollars. Now, not all of the bizarre aspects of the tax code can be worked around or through by you and adroit accountants. Some of them are going to require actions by Congress. And given that many investments require years of certainty, policymakers need to think through how to help provide a measure of certainty through tax reform. And I wanted to come today, as we move now to tax reform, having gotten these extenders out of the Senate Finance Committee, and say that my views with respect to tax reform and energy can be summarized in just 2 words. Those words are parity and predictability. And my view is you can't have real competition between energy technologies when there are such widespread disparities in both the incentives and their predictability baked in to the tax code. So let me give you a couple of examples with respect to the lack of parity. First, look at the competition between liquefied natural gas and diesel as a fuel for long-haul trucking. Each fuel has its merits, and ideally the tax code would treat them comparably and let the market decide. At first glance, they seem the same. Both are taxed at 24 cents per gallon. LNG, however, doesn't pack nearly the same energy punch per gallon of diesel, so it takes more gallons of LNG to go the same distance as it would on diesel. Taxing based on volume instead of the much more relevant energy content means that LNG is effectively taxed at a much higher rate than diesel, thus stacking the deck against LNG. Another example would be waste heat and waste heat to power. Right now, the industrial facilities can receive a credit for installing efficient combined heat and power systems that use the same heat source for both electricity generation and for industrial processes. Facilities that already have big sources of heat, though, and just want to install a generator to take advantage of the heat that they're wasting aren't eligible for the credit, leaving thousands of megawatts of energy to be lost out the top of smokestacks each and every year. Now that's just the consequences of the lack of parity. Let's talk about what it means for the predictability side. The lack of predictability also hurts clean energy investment. For example, when Congress allowed all of the biofuels tax provisions to expire at the end of 2012, it sent inconsistent signals to an industry that has made investment based on policies in place since 2005. The problem with that is that the passive expiration of provisions that work for small new companies like Zeachem in my home state of Oregon, coupled with the retention of timeless tax treatments for established energy industries like oil, ensure that the playing field stays uneven. This means small companies never have a chance to get out of the gate and catch up to big companies, and our nation's energy choices suffer as a result. Renewables with long lead times also suffer from the unpredictability of the tax code. Geothermal, biomass, waste energy, and large-scale solar power all take a long time to get permitted and built. And when there's an end in sight for the credits and no certainty they'll be renewed, financiers get nervous and either back out or often bump their rates up so high that the projects are no longer viable. So these are just a few examples of the inconsistency in the tax code, and it's no wonder when there are more than 40 different specific tax breaks, more than a dozen preferences for fossil fuels like percentage depreciation and intangible drilling costs, 10 for renewable fuels and alternative vehicles like the alternative fuels credit and credits for purchasing plug-in vehicles, 6 for clean electricity like the production tax credit and the solar investment tax credit. 25 of these are temporary, requiring yearly congressional action, which, as from time to time you see in the news, in a Congress that sometimes has trouble ordering a Coca-Cola, is a little bit difficult to have those annual credits renewed. And each one of these incentives comes with its own set of rules and definitions. So my view is it is time to end the piecemeal stop-and-go approach. It's not working for the cause of promoting clean energy. It's not working for investment in this space, and it's not working for the American people. Now, our country needs comprehensive tax reform that embraces parity and predictability to move to a technology-neutral, level playing field for all different types of energy. And my bottom line is parity and predictability should lead to greater simplicity. It should be easier for you to get into the business of investing in the infrastructure of our nation. To make investments in clean energy shouldn't require a full employment program for accountants and lawyers. It ought to be something that people could enter into more simply. And I start with the premise that what ought to be done is to drastically reduce the more than 40 existing energy incentives I described to just a handful. Now, I'm not suggesting that we do less as a country or reduce our support for transitioning to a lower carbon economy, but what I'm suggesting is that the United States can have a strong domestic energy sector supported by investors and entrepreneurs like you all in a simpler, more sustainable way. Now, I've only been chair of the Senate Finance Committee for 19 days, but I can tell you I think we're off to some good ideas. Ambassador Baucus, who's going to do an outstanding job in China, teamed up with Senator Hatch and built a strong foundation for tax reform in the Senate. They held an extensive series of hearings, and Chairman Dave Camp in the House of Representatives has also introduced a comprehensive bill. Both have offered some fresh, bold ideas, and it's a safe bet that the next tax reform effort will draw extensively from the ideas of Chairman Baucus and Chairman Camp with the valuable input of Senator Hatch. Now, having talked so extensively about reform, I'm sure some of you are saying if the current system doesn't make any sense and it would be smarter to have comprehensive reform than pass extenders, so how come there you new chairman fellow, Mr. Wyden, how come you passed a bill out of the Finance Committee that maintains much of this mess? First of all, many of these extenders are well-intentioned and ought to be permanent. And to me, passing this bill and making it the final extenders package puts an expiration date on the status quo. And it builds a bridge to tax reform, and it gives the rest of the country 2 years of certainty. That's the length of the extender package about their tax bill. Stretching this debate out, and I'm going to do everything I can to see what we passed in the committee last Thursday, enacted into law quickly, only leaves taxpayers in limbo and has them waste more time and money trying to plan what's ahead. So it's very clear to me that it made more sense to put these provisions back in place for 2 years, then put a lens to each of them before deciding what ought to get a permanent place in a 21st century tax code. And that certainly made more sense than just dropping everything and doing so much damage immediately to the cause of renewable energy. And let me give you just one last example of what I think the debate is all about. How many of you are familiar in this room with MLPs, Master Limited Partnerships? How many have never heard of them? Okay, so almost everybody knows what they are. They've been a financing vehicle that's been particularly good for oil and natural gas. We're very pleased with the natural gas renaissance. Natural gas 50% cleaner than the other fossil fuels. But renewable energy has not been eligible for that particular type of finance. So for purposes of tax reform, the choice for the Congress is this. Either you can say, let's roll back MLPs altogether, or roll them back very significantly, which is what Chairman Camp decided in the House, or you can say we're going to keep them. And it seems to me if we say we're going to keep them, how do you make the argument that somehow renewable energy shouldn't be part of it if you're serious about parity and fairness. So you make a choice. There's an argument for not having MLPs, but it seems to me if you have them, I think it is very hard to argue that somehow renewable energy should not have a chance to exist side by side. So what I hope to do as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee is I hope to really put some flesh behind this idea of an all-of-the-above energy policy. It's pretty hard to say you're going to have an all-of-the-above energy policy when some sources have subsidies at this level in the stratosphere that are permanent, and other sources like the renewable energy fuels are down there at the curbside, and they're up and down on the roller coaster. If we can move closer to parity, my friends, and I would hope that this would be one of the themes of this excellent Bloomberg conference, if we can move closer to parity between energy sources and closer to a system that rewarded real predictability, that would be good for the planet, it would promote renewable energy, it would be good for our economy, and it would mean that we're serious in the United States about an all-of-the-above energy policy. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.